Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. I'm Matt Amundson, the CMO of DuploCloud. I'm joined today by Sheila Stafford, the CEO of TeamSense, and we're really excited to learn about Sheila and about the team at TeamSense, and also get to know a little bit about her experience raising capital for her business. So Sheila, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet, you bet. So let's just hop right into it. Tell us a little bit about you, and most importantly, tell us about TeamSense and the mission of your business.
Yeah. So Sheila Stafford, CEO, co-founder of TeamSense, and TeamSense is a trusted digital companion for frontline teams. And we make those frontline teams more efficient, more engaged, and more empowered to do their best work. Specifically, we focus on frontline teams in the manufacturing and logistics sector. Although our customers do vary across the board, but we're definitely specially built for those particular verticals.
Awesome. Awesome. And I noticed that, one of the things that or one of the things that stood out to me about TeamSense is it gives your customers and your customers' users the opportunity to communicate in a way that actually most people communicate today. So why don't you tell us a little bit about specifically how the product works?
Yeah, great question. So, what a lot of people don't understand about frontline workers in these particular sectors is that they have no digital connection whatsoever to their companies. Like, if you think about how most folks probably on this call will think about how they communicate with their companies, it's all through, Slack or email.
Yeah.
Folks that work on the front line don't have access to a company computer, don't have access to a company phone. And for their day-to-day work, they show up and they generally work with their hands. And so in order for them to actually access any of the infrastructure that the company has, like they need to go to like a training room or to a break room, and they have to do that on their breaks. And so when you think about kind of all of those tools for digital efficiencies or all of the tools that companies are investing in to help, upgrade and ready their workforce for the next phases, they're not accessible to the frontline worker on a day-to-day basis. And so what we do is we solve that problem, and we solve that in a way that's really comfortable for them. And so that's all through text message. We don't have a downloadable app, which is another kind of unique nuance of this workforce. I worked in and around manufacturing my entire career before founding the company, and have had to ask people to download an app. And their first question is like, are you paying for it? And then when you're like, no, then they're like, not going to happen. Like, why would I download a company sponsored app on my personal phone so like you can reach me or track me or all the things that, Big Brother company is going to do? People understand that like nobody's tracking them with a text message. And so our entire business is built on the foundational communication of text message.
That is amazing, and it makes so much sense. For a long time in my career, I actually worked in consumer packaged goods, where we actually had warehousing and we had picking, and so we had lots of frontline
Oh
workers, and
yeah.
actually like time management and timesheet management for those folks. And this was 20 years ago, was really challenging, and we were starting just at that point to see the evolution of technology and certainly smartphones and sort of handheld computers and that were, in everybody's purse or pocket. So this just seems like such a no-brainer and such an obvious winner in the market. Clearly, you guys are doing great. You're already selling. You already have customers like HelloFresh and DHL. Just incredible journey so far. Tell me a little bit, just because I know you worked in the logistics space before and manufacturing.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about the sort of aha moment, that compelled you to start TeamSense.
We started in 2020, and really kind of that COVID moment was the big aha.
Hmm.
And so as the government started to shut down different operations, like it was apparent and obvious to me that there's 0% chance that they're not going to figure out a way for the manufacturing sector to work. I mentioned, my past history at, General Motors. Like, you don't make trucks from your kitchen table. Like, you
Yeah.
have to get somebody in. And if you look at kind of the importance of the manufacturing sector against the GDP, like logic will tell you like they will figure it out. I think so. Kind of, I knew for sure that they would need some sort of solution. And the other piece of data that I had from my experience was that these folks don't have a digital connection. And the rate of change of requirements of the companies that were coming out on notifying people, collecting symptoms, and how they change between like the federal government, the state government, the local government, made employers basically in this impossible position that they wouldn't be able to communicate with the workers at scale. And so our vision from day zero was to be that digital connection. And we thought, okay, COVID is a really interesting opportunity because it's a solution that everybody needs. There's no incumbents. And I bet based on, my experience and our team's kind of experience in the sector that we could win. And it would be like an all out foot race. And so what we did was we created a really robust workflow engine in the background that could look at predicate answers and then deliver you a different response, and made that super flexible so that as kind of the rules change, like we could easily change and then continue to deliver this basically workflow via text message to the frontline workers. And then we went to market with that. Now, knowing what we know, like we knew at some point that go to market version of like, hey, we've got a COVID symptom tracker and a mass communication tool to like notify people that they've been exposed, blah, 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 would eventually die. And so we immediately had kind of like our next version of go to market of the workflow engine ready to go, which is an absence management. It's kind of we'll call it sister problem. And so the moment we saw kind of the dip happen, which was apparent and obvious because of when the vaccine came out, you're like, obviously this is going to stop. We then launched the attendance solution, and it's still kind of that same workflow engine in the background, still has the same vision of the digital connection, but now the main go-to-market is on the attendance workflow. That is our main like kind of flagship workflow today. And what's so unique about that particular workflow, and similar to COVID, it has some of those same foundational elements, is that it's required. So it's a required workflow. Every employee that needs to notify their employer that they're unable to come in has to do so with a particular kind of policy or format. So it's required by policy. The second is that it reaches 100% of the workforce. And so we know that we have that digital connection with everyone. And the third and kind of most important are kind of this two factor is, one is the existing process sucks. Like everybody hates it. So if you're the frontline employee, you're the manager, you're the company, everybody's like, the incumbent is terrible. But more importantly is that attendance is linked very, very closely to productivity and production. And so productivity and production in manufacturing companies is like where the dollars are. And so to give folks a sense of scale, like when I was at GM eons ago, when the line would go down, like they would bark in your ear to get up and running that it was $10,000 a minute. And so for every line every minute that's not running, that's $10,000, the cost of everybody and then the end product kind of coming off the end in order to go for sale. And so every manufacturing company has this kind of their version of $10,000, and it tends to be pretty high because like manufacturing is where the rubber hits the road and like pays for the big ivory tower. And so TeamSense is able to show like a really crazy ROI very, very fast because like even if I just save you 5 minutes, like you've paid for the entire software for the year.
Incredible. Both in terms of product, but also in terms of story here. This is just amazing. How much time, like I know this is sort of an off script question, but like how much time went into developing this narrative? Because I assume it was part and parcel to the success in your capital raises, but like how much time and effort did you and your co-founders or you and some of the employees there put into putting together this really, really streamlined narrative?
I mean, I think it comes really from my history in the space. And so I don't know if all founders have the same, like really, really in-depth knowledge. Like I lived and worked in manufacturing for over 20 years. I like immediately kind of saw the opportunity and knew some of the inefficiencies involved with the existing processes. And I just thought that like COVID would be the like forcing function to finally make somebody like pay up for it. What I didn't anticipate was how not only was COVID the initial forcing function, but like the impact that kind of black swan event had on the labor market and how difficult it would be to kind of attract and retain labor, and how much more like attendance would be put into the spotlight and how much more productivity per employee would be put into the spotlight was something I hadn't anticipated, but it gives us like a humongous tailwind. And so I think the story came together naturally just because of our in-depth knowledge in the space, but then, just kind of got added on of like what's happening in the macro environment of like, oh, this is actually, really interesting for us, and a nice tailwind.
Awesome, awesome. Well, just dovetailing off that, let's start to talk a
Yeah.
little bit about your fundraising journey. Uh, when did you guys start thinking about like, hey, we've got a great idea here. We want to see if we can, raise a little capital to take it from idea to, a V1 or an MVP. Tell us a little bit about that.
Our journey, and I think everybody's journey is really, really unique. And
Hmm.
so I had just an incredible opportunity. My last role before founding the company was an executive in a publicly traded company called Fortive.
Hmm.
And Fortive was looking for ways to kind of diversify their portfolio and had partnered with a startup studio and venture fund in Seattle called Pioneer Square Labs. And so I was kind of employee number one into that with the goal of like, hey, like Fortive is really interesting. Like, could you build something that Fortive would want to buy?
Mm.
And so having my kind of executive experience in Fortive and like what was happening with COVID, that aha moment was basically the pitch. And my former employer became our first investor. And so like we got like the initial seed fund, which is only a couple $100,000, but like when you're at zero,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
that's enough to get like an engineer, because I'm not an engineer by trade, to help build the vision of like, hey, this is how we're going to do it, and get somebody to build it. I'll fast forward a couple of things because there's some major nuances into the story. So like
Yeah.
we build it and like we come out of the gates like flying. Like our first customer was our very first customer was in June of 2020, was a small construction firm. But then July of 2020, we signed like Pella Windows. And in August of 2020, we signed like Hunter Douglas. So like these
Wow.
big brands
Yeah.
are coming in. And so the business is doing really well. And Fortive in that initial setup had a first right of refusal to buy us. So they then execute the first right of refusal to buy us after about a year or so into market. We roll into Fortive. So now we're like tiny, tiny company inside big company.
Yeah.
We still kind of are operating the business. This is now at the time where COVID vaccine is starting to come out and we need to make a decision. If you think about it from like a 10,000 foot view level, um, what we were doing with COVID was kind of like an OSHA mandated
Hmm.
workflow, right?
Yeah.
Like OSHA was involved. And Fortive was really, really interested in these kind of like mandated workflows and like how their strategy was playing out from like where they were investing in software plays. And then I really thought that attendance management, although is not mandated per se by OSHA, would be a better play than to try to like automate all of these OSHA workflows, which there's a ton of opportunity there. Don't get me wrong. But I just thought that having kind of that mandatory reach of 100% of the workers would be way more valuable than, kind of the OSHA. You think about like the OSHA requirements are around like specific jobs. So like electricians and maintenance folks and, fire equipment maintenance
Yep.
and, checking off that I've checked all the fire extinguishers and the sprinkler heads and all of those workflows for sure could be digital and automated, but they just wouldn't give us the reach that I thought was valuable. And so that basically put us at odds with Fortive's strategy. And so we decided to spin out of the company and came to an
Wow.
agreement of like recapitalizing the business and then going and raise our first round under this new structure. And so that first round was really interesting because we're like a duck, right? Like we're like, like just a different set of cap table, a different set of history, and
Hmm.
then needed an investor to kind of, take a bet on us with this vision of like attendance management is going to be the door to this digital connection, and that the digital connection is way more valuable in venture scale than kind of digitizing mandatory workflows.
Yeah.
And so we went out and raised under that, and that took a while to raise. So we came out in June of, let's see, 2022.
Hmm.
And then we ended up closing the round right when SVB collapsed. Like that was the day that I was supposed to transfer the funds into the account.
Yeah.
And I think we had, I don't know, maybe 8 weeks of cash left. So, and then all of a sudden your bank collapsed, like really good time, let me tell you that. Um, But like we ended up surviving that and getting the investment in, and it's been phenomenal. So now we're thinking about raising our A later this year. Like we'll be a really big A as far as kind of where we are from a revenue perspective in relation to your average Series A.
Amazing. Amazing. How scary was it when you were thinking about spinning out of Fortive and going out and, raising capital from an outside venture firm?
I thought about that quite a bit, but then in the end, I think like I was so adamant about kind of the value that we would have in reaching 100% of the workforce
Yeah.
versus kind of where they wanted to go, that my view was like, I can stay inside, and for sure you're in a big company, and I had a great relationship with the company and reputation within the company, but I honestly thought that staying in, like our business would basically like die on the vine,
Mhm.
right? It would be like dripped funds and like wouldn't be able to get kind of really that first stage of ignition that like a rocket needs. And so, when looking at it, it was like, okay, I've spent some time, right? It was a couple of years of my life in getting this off the ground. Like what's going to give us like the optimal chance of really seeing this out and really seeing what we could do. And then I think it became kind of obvious and clear. Um, and then it was just like, okay, we got to like burn the ships, right? Like this is
Yep.
our plan, like freaking light them on fire, like we are going to raise. And so we embarked on that process of like, this is going to be the future. Otherwise, we're going to sit there and maybe toil for another couple of years until it, grinds to a halt and we just stop funding it inside Fortive.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, fortune favors the brave, right? Um,
That's right.
so what was, as you spun out and you started to go through a more traditional fundraising process, what were some of the things that really surprised you about that process?
Can we curse on this?
Yeah, of course.
Or
Yeah,
no?
this is an adult
I was just checking, just
channel.
making sure. So some things that surprised me. So like we had like a pretty good we had a lot of really brand names. Like I already kind of dropped some of
Yeah,
the really
sure.
early customers. And so we had early traction, and we had a lot of early traction into uh the business itself, and a lot of really great KPIs. So I knew that like the business fundamentals would be strong when we went to raise. To give you an example, like the moment I decided to launch attendance as kind of the next thing, like we tripled the business in 1 quarter. Like it
Wow.
was
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, like this is just kind of like the data, just like validating the decision. And so I knew a lot of like the foundational was there. And of course, being a first time founder, I didn't know much about the processes of raising and then some of like the traditions. Like I created a financial model on like how I thought like the business would grow, like based on users and expansion, and then like had um sales from like just a function of like how many accounts that we had within equal sales. And so I went out to market, and I'm meeting with all these, different folks. And like when we went out to raise, remember that was the time where like basically like SaaS was like falling like a
Oh
knife,
yeah.
right? So you go out here and then just like literally like day by day, it's just like you're trying to catch this falling knife of valuations and things kind of blowing up like right in front of us. And so I go out to market with this model that I had made, and I'm meeting with all these investors, and people are like, no, no, no. Finally, this one investor, Brett Queener from Bonfire, is like, Sheila, stop. I don't know what number he was like in the number of investors I had, at least 20 people in. And
Yeah.
he like leans in and he goes, Sheila, this is the worst fucking financial model I've ever seen in my life.
Jeez.
And I was like, great. Like, tell me more. Like, and he's like, you're thinking about it all wrong. Like, you really need to think about like sales capacity. Like, they only have so much capacity to close. And like, your forcing function on your revenue should be based on how fast you can hire and ramp the sales team and then build your model off of that. And I was like, I never thought of it like that. And he's like, listen, like, I'm out, but like, go and revert your model. And I was like, okay. So that night I like redo it, take the input, like put it all in. And I reach out to him and I was like, hey, like, I know you're out, but like, you're the only one brave enough to tell me. Like everybody
Yeah.
else was just like, like didn't say shit. Like, will you look at it? And so Brett is like, yeah, I believe in karma. Like, I'll take a look at it. So I look at it and he's like, this looks great. Like, go raise. And so I'm going along the process and continue to go through. I end up with a term sheet, and it's with an investor that like, I just wasn't feeling like this great, like,
Yeah.
connection with. And like,
Mhm.
but as I mentioned, when we closed our round, we had 8 weeks of cash left. And so I'm starting to get a little bit worried on like, okay, like I'm going to have to like, I guess a term sheet is better than nothing.
Right.
And so, Tia McCann from Pioneer Square Labs says to me, he's like, hey, Sheila, like before you sign the term sheet, like think back to all these investors that you've met with and like choose your like top 1 or 2 and just write them a note. Like write them a note and say like, hey, like I have a term sheet. I'm about to sign it. But like, if you're interested, like, here's why I thought we'd work really well together. And like, here's what the business has done.
Yeah.
And so Brett was far and away like my number 1. And so I wrote Brett this note that was like, hey, like, know that you're out. Like, since the last time we've talked, like, because now time has progressed, the
Sure.
business is, continuing to grow, blah, blah, blah. Here's the results. Like, here's why I think that, we would work well together. And within, I don't know, a day, like Brett responds or like, let's meet. And within a week, I had a term sheet from Brett.
Wow.
And so we ended up closing the round with my favorite investor throughout the entire process. So what a cool way to like re-engage those folks that you really had a connection with.
That is an amazing story. And I'm not just saying that hyperbolically for this recording. Like, that is a truly amazing story. Not just because somebody was willing to give you that kind of honest feedback, but you actually took it, internalized it, and said like, okay, great. Well, like, I'm just going to adjust so that the next time I put this in front of somebody, they're not like, oh gosh, this person doesn't know how to build a model. And then for them to eventually come back and end up being, giving you a term sheet is just incredible. So that is an amazing story.
I think it talks a little bit about, kind of that founder investor connection
Yeah.
and, willingness. Like Brett, like if I think about how we interact right now, like it's phenomenal. Like he just tells me like it is. Great. Like I was a collegiate athlete. Like don't beat around the bush. Like we got shit to do. Like it's not personal. Like we're here trying to build a business. And so like just having that sense, I think is so important and really a function of like who is that investor on the other side. So that's important for folks to think about.
So this has been amazing. Thank you so much. Any sort of parting advice you have to people who are thinking about raising their seed round? Maybe one thing that you'd tell just about anybody.
I think when they look out there, like I way more venture towards the partner and like your relationship with the partner than like the brand name of the firm, like at this stage, like maybe later on when you get to have like much, much bigger rounds and you need way more capital, like is the like marquee brand of the firm, should it play a different, we'll say percentage in how you choose your investor, but like really, like find that person that just feels like you feel like you can partner with and level up. Like one of the things I talk a lot about with Brett in particular is that he's the type of person where like you're walking along and like you fall into a hole, right? Like he will jump into the hole and like look around with you and be like, like how are we going to get out of this hole? And like figure out a plan to get out together.
Yeah.
Versus like an investor that kind of like looks down from the top and is like, hey, told you shouldn't have done that. Like, better get out. Like, all my other portcos are doing way better than you.
Yeah.
Like, just want to let you know. And you're just down there like help. And so like, think about that, especially at the seed stage where it's so, so important. And you've got so many, you're wearing so many hats and you've got so many like really, really important, like do or die decisions to make. Like go for somebody who's really going to be in there with you versus somebody that's going to give you a shiny name, but in the end, isn't going to be, down in the trenches helping you solve the problems.
Fantastic advice. Sheila, thank you so much for your time today. I know your time is very precious as you guys are headed to the next stage of your growth. But I want to say thank you again so very much for being with us, Sheila Stafford, and incredible success so far at TeamSense. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. And the best way for people to get a hold of you if they have questions, LinkedIn?
Yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'll be there.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today, and stay tuned for more episodes with more founders.